universe for what is an R-rated film, and is a very successful R-rated film, is a film that is R-rated because it's mature in the true sense of R-rated. Hutch, for your point of view, you know, people come to these characters with a lot of legacy, and not just Hugh being on screen for almost 2 decades, but a lot of legacy. How do you meet that expectation and also tell the story that you think you really want to tell? Because there's a lot in this movie. You guys have seen it, you know it. From the very beginning, there's stuff about the immigration, there's stuff about civil rights, there's many, many issues being addressed here. And they're not being addressed in a nuanced way, they're out there, they're clear that you're talking about these things.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things to that. I mean, the first Hugh's already touched on, which is probably most important for some of us who've been around these movies for a very long time, is entrusting them to truly gifted artists. And I've said this before, and I'll keep saying it as many times as I'm giving a microphone or a platform, Jim is one of the most gifted filmmakers working in cinema today. I really believe that so strongly. And this story was not only perfectly suited to the conclusion of an iconic character and a conclusion that Hugh desperately wanted, but I think perfectly suited to Jim and his talents as a character-based storyteller, as somebody who has done a broad range of different cinematic styles, and for me seemed to be almost destined to make a movie like this that combined all the commercial power and excitement and satisfaction, but with an incredible depth and artistry and thoughtfulness. And so to me, that's the first thing. And in answer to your other question about, you know, in this new landscape, I actually think rather than these kinds of movies becoming more rare, I think it's actually the opposite. I think the audience is demanding, and the quality of entertainment that's available is demanding, that we as storytellers and studios as financiers must be more bold. That if we're not, we get pablum, it gets rejected. So I actually do think, I can't pretend that everybody agrees with that thesis, but I see it happening. I think it's part of why.
Well, you can certainly say to people, like, look at the box office, look at the response. You know, it's so often with films, blockbusters, which keep the lights on in Hollywood. We don't have to admit that. You know, but they don't receive a lot of critical acclaim. They don't receive a lot of serious discussion. This film did, you know, and that's a double threat right there.
And we have a studio that actually genuinely supported us in making it, which is remarkable. I mean, this was not a story of, wow, we had to battle with them and they were so unsupportive and didn't understand us, and that was not the case. And
but they did. It was explained to our leaders at Fox that they were probably leaving $75 to $100 million on the table if this movie was PG. And they were also, I had a big fight in the sense that I did not want to call the movie X-Men, anything, or Wolverine, the last...
Logan, The Return.
You think
that all these movies should have the same
You would not
title?
believe the amount of memos that generated while in production to just get the movie called Logan. And again, marketing people were essentially convinced and telling the bosses of the studio that you're leaving money on the table if you don't have Wolverine in the title. And to me...
Do you buy that?
I don't give a shit. Meaning that there's a point at which the logic of what keeps money on the table, even the language of it, just makes me nauseous and has nothing to do with making a good film. And a lot of the reason titles and posters and these things matter is that you die so quickly. With the internet and the amount of crosstalk that happens, the decision about your film is made in a fucking instant. And so the second you seem like another one of these die-cut Play-Doh fuzzy pumper fucking things coming out of the line, you're just done. And that to address a couple things about the rating too, while I'm blabbing. Well, one would be that you know, an interesting thing happened to me today. My assistant called me and he said, you know, we got the TV cut for Logan. You know, that when you're a director of a movie, they tell you all the things they had to cut for TV, right? And but what's really interesting, obviously for broadcast TV, where it probably will never appear, there was a good amount of just knife pokes that were taken out. But interestingly, for most cable, there was almost no cuts at all, except language. And that what I want to bring that up for is actually an interesting point, which is that Game of Thrones is like NC-17. And that in a way, because we're so cowardly, and our politicians are so cowardly, and even some of the people who run the MPAA are so frightened to make a change, we end up calling something R, and it becomes restricted, and ooh, you made an R film, when you could turn on fucking television any day of the week and see shit that's just as graphic or frank. And so in a weird way, we're holding back theatrical films in a weird way and making it really hard to do anything but make a film for 12-year-olds.
But I would say at the same time, is one of the things I think is one of the things very successful about Logan, and you mentioned Game of Thrones, is, you know, for so many years we've seen this explosion in storytelling in television. And people will even say, oh, it's not a television show, it's a 65-hour movie, right? And I think that's the standard.
I agree that it's great.
Yeah, and I do agree it's great, but what I think is really interesting is with Logan, you create a film that excels and aims to and excels towards that level of storytelling. It works on that. Logan assumes that you've watched seasons 1 to 5 of Wolverine in many ways. It assumes you're working with a story that you have an understanding of. It doesn't make you
I actually made the movie that I hoped it would function if you had not seen any of it.
But that's why it works, because it works on both levels, because it doesn't say to you, oh, now we need to have a giant flashback scene that explains to you everything that ever happened in 5 minutes. So Hugh, for you, going into that, were you concerned about what this Logan was going to be like as opposed to the other Logans, for you as an actor?
Concerned, yeah, because I knew it was my last time, so I wanted to go to bed at night knowing that I'd done everything, we'd all done everything we possibly could to fulfill this character, so, and I am sleeping really well, so on that level of work. I've just lost my train of thought.
Well, he was very protective of me, I will say. That one of the things that you did was that he really put his shoulder down and was very insistent on just holding tight to one another and kind of saying, this is the kind of movie we're going to make. Do you want to make it? But also in the creative endeavor of doing it. You know, you don't know if you're going to be successful. You don't know it's going to work. And the only thing you know while you're doing it is that it's kind of different than what we've done before. So that the confidence and the faith that you had in this picture is why it exists, to be honest.
Well, and I just remember what I was going to say. But thanks for saying that. There's really 8 people, I would say 8 core people who've believed so much in this film and fought hard for this film. I think it's my new paradigm for great filmmaking. It doesn't matter how big it is, less people fighting harder, believing more is generally the way they're committed.
So you guys are like a wild bunch.
Yeah, it felt like that. And I'm talking studio people, I'm talking writers, I'm talking actors, and I want to particularly mention Patrick Stewart, who is not here. But I hope this doesn't disappoint anyone. This is what I was going to say before. I had never read a comic book when I got cast as Wolverine. I didn't know what Wolverine was. When I turned up, this is embarrassing to admit, when I turned up on set for the first one. You can admit
it now though, because you're,
now I can.
You're good, right?
I had studied a documentary on wolves. Because I thought, and I was doing some crazy kind of animal stuff, and someone going, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I saw this thing on wolves." And the cool thing about wolves is they're always looking down like that because they're smelling. They're actually smelling. That's why they look so ferocious. There's got nothing. And the guy goes, "Dude, you're not a wolf." I said, "Well, yeah, it's kind of like a wolf man, right?" And he goes, "No, it's a wolverine." I said, "Well, there's no such thing as a wolverine." And he goes, "It's an animal in the zoo down the road." We've got some weird shit in Australia. I've never heard of a wolverine. I thought it was like a comic book name for an animal. That's how little I knew, right? So going back to your point of this movie, I didn't come to it as a comic book fan. I have become a fan. I've come to appreciate particularly the art and the storytelling, the political messages, everything. The sophistication of comic books has blown me away. But when I came to it, I was the last person to go and see a comic book movie, if there was one, right? So I was like, I really believe that the people out there, friends of mine, who go, I'm not into comic book movies, that was the kind of movie we wanted to make. We certainly didn't want to take people for granted and assume they'd watched any of the X-Men movies or any of the Wolverine movies. In the same way, you can watch Unforgiven if you've never seen a Western in your life, and that is a beautiful story that will rip your heart open.
And that's a very good, very interesting to bring that up, because almost from the very beginning, certainly actually, I got to tell you, when I saw the poster, I was like, this is a Western. That's what this movie is. I mean, if you want to give it a genre, this is a Western.
Yes.
This is like, the old gang are going to come and they're going to try to take the new, it was, and I felt like that, the limo was a stagecoach, and it felt like that from almost the get-go.
Well, you know, the interesting thing about Westerns is that they have so much to offer. I think noir films as well, but the Westerns, one of the things they offer us is a lesson in how action films, kind of right, wrong, hero, villain, underdog films, how you can make them without building them on ever-rising stakes. Like, we have this arms race going on in tentpole movies, which is like, oh, you blew up a city, I'm going to blow up a state. You blew up a state, I'm going to blow up a country. Now the whole planet's in jeopardy. Now we're going to go back in time, and the whole universe. And at some point, I don't really believe an audience gives more of a shit whether North America or the planet will go, or one family in a house. And that we care just as much, in fact, sometimes more, about the people we get to know than to just watch spheres blowing up with new ovaloid explosion patterns developed by ILM. And that the reality becomes, the Western teaches us how to make you care about the characters. And that because it doesn't have the special effects, other than men and women, guns, horses, culture clashes, railroads, but it's really simple stuff. And you can learn a lot about dramatic structure and character work from great Westerns.
You mentioned, and we talked about him, the man whose name we will say in absence, which is Patrick Stewart. The two of you've become so linked, and I think in the public imagination and as actors, and I know personally that you're friends. What was it like for you and Patrick? This knowing that this is the last one, that this was the send-off.
It was so exciting. He didn't know it was his last one, by the way, at the time. He was like, all right, you're going, but I'm sticking around. Like,
they already killed him once. So.
And the first day of shooting for Patrick and I was that 7-minute scene at the beginning in the tank. And there's probably more nuance, more layers, more level, more humanity in that 7 minutes than we've been able to enjoy collectively in the last, 17 years. Just, the nature of those ensemble movies, there's only so much time you get on screen, there's only so many characters that can be fully developed, and even though that relationship, the quasi-father-son sort of dynamic that was there, had been explored to a certain degree, particularly in X-Men 1, but never to this level. And I remember we hugged each other at the end of that first day. It was so thrilling, and for me, as a drama student, back in 1992, I watched all of the John Barton tapes. If anyone's interested in acting, it's How to Play Shakespeare. Yeah. So the John Barton tapes has McKellen, and it has Patrick Stewart and Judi Dench and David Suchet and Alan Bates and Alan Howard, blah, 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 everybody. And I remember thinking, one day I would love to be able to perform Shakespeare like him. And the first movie set in America I turn up to is Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart. So I was... For me,
and you're acting like a wolf.
Thinking they'll be impressed.
Oh, we're impressed now. We're impressed now. Greatest YouTube video never released.
I was like, this is what people in America. This is De Niro and Pacino and Heat. Watching those two playing chess together, I was like, this is amazing to me. So 17 years later, to develop this too, and when Jim was writing those scenes, I was so excited to come to set and work with Patrick on those scenes. And he lost 22 pounds. It was quite alarming when he turned up, because he's boasted to me all the time. He's been the same weight since he was 14 years of age until this film. Like, he says maybe 1 pound or 2 pounds. And I was like, do not tell anybody that. So I'm telling everyone. Because everyone will hate you. But here he lost 22 pounds, and he this very youthful, strong guy who seemed very frail and fragile. And the whole thing was magic. It was a dream. And then Daphne, of course. You add Daphne into it, and it was just,
Definitely applause. I wanted to talk about that. It's the relationship that Wolverine, that Logan has had through the X-Men franchise has always been as Charles is a mentor to him, he's been a mentor to the younger X-Men, and those relationships can sometimes be quite complicated. With Daphne, there's multiple levels of complication. There's acceptance, there's insight, eventually there's even a greater bond, literally genetically. James, as you constructed that characterization, and as you guys worked on the film together, how did you want that relationship to evolve? Because it evolves very slowly as you watch it. And it doesn't give away right away, like, oh, she's your daughter. There's a whole aspect there that, in fact, you feel at many points that she could disappear at any time.
Well, I think you know it's its daughter pretty early, but I do hear what you're saying. I think that
I will admit I did not.
Really?
You know what?
Even when Patrick at the end of the first act is going, she's your daughter.
because of the way the film was constructed, I actually thought, oh no, well, this is a man who has some degree of mental derangement. So there's a degree of impulse and projection on there. And secondly, it almost felt like, well, they would just get to that too quickly and easily. Whereas the way you did it came up and then went around.
Let me answer your question maybe in a more interesting way instead of putting you on the defensive. Was the reality for me was that when I thought about what we could do with this movie, and this is a thought process that even happened to me working on the previous one, but if you're making if you're making a movie about spectacle, you go, what would be some crazy shit thing that some new British thespian in contact lenses and a wild wig is going to do to the world in this movie. But in this movie, you're asking yourself, I don't want to do that. So how am I going to create what is going to be the challenge to these characters that is going to be internal as opposed to external? So you then go, what is Wolverine most frightened of? And actually, it's part of the reason I love the character so much is he really probably wouldn't give a shit if the world ended. It might be a relief. And he certainly doesn't care about one side versus another all that much. And he's kind of, so what's he scared of? He's been living a really long time. His own death might not even scare him that much. What's he scared of? And the answer to me, which was consistent through the comics and through the movies, was commitment, vulnerability, connection, intimacy, and love. He's scared of love. And so it seemed to me in the case of Hugh's character that what we had to do was to lay out a kind of trial for him through the movie in which he was going to resist. And I mean, he resists. I mean, one of the things I love about this movie is you couldn't make a movie. I mean, this guy literally almost hits Daphne with a pipe in the beginning of the movie, and he abandons her and tries to abandon her, and even late in the second act, gets in a car and is trying to leave her in the woods. And we love him anyway. And because we know what he's struggling with, which is he can't handle her dependency on him, her needing him, her affection for him. And similarly with Patrick's character, you have a guy who's played a father figure, a kind of calming force, a force of wisdom throughout these movies. And even Patrick, for his career, has played from Star Trek to X-Men, always someone with a kind of, who's kind of the Pepto-Bismol and the wise advice on a situation. And so what do you take from him, this kind of Mr. Know-It-All? You take from him his know-it-all. You take from him suddenly his brain, he isn't that guy anymore. And what does he do? How does Charles Xavier function when his greatest gift is fading? And that's a really interesting character question. And so, in a way, those are the initial questions that set me off. And that scene in the tank was the first thing I wrote, even before I had a script. I had kind of a treatment and that scene. And because that scene, you can almost, if you play it back or watch it, it's almost, you're figuring out everything. What happened to the X-Men, how we got here, their attitude toward each other, all of that kind of got laid out in that first scene of them together. And but it was very much that, if that is an answer to your question, how then all the other elements, and Daphne, of course, is then a whole nother level of pure love, meaning you have a guy who's caring for his father, but there's nothing more pure and unquestionable than the love and connection between a child and their parent. And so, you know, and that somehow to have these two extremely mistrusting and uneasy characters have to work out a truce that by the third act might allow them to come together, became the clear shape of the movie, and everything else how do we do it? Does that answer you in some
It
way?
does. But it also, you bring up, when you talk about that scene in the tank, it's interesting because that scene is so much, to me, is like theater, watching the two. I mean, honestly, you could see that on Broadway and be very well production designed, but you felt like that. And yet there were many, many aesthetic changes and shifts and tones that you brought to the film. I wanted to get a sense of that before we go to some questions from you guys. Is you seem to really do a mashup of different styles. Like you really allowed your palette to just be as luxurious as possible.
I think in many ways I'm just trying to make the movie. I don't look at each movie. I mean, I can speak to this. I don't look at each movie trying to direct it differently. If I were making a Western, I derive the same way. If I'm making a cop movie, if I'm making a romantic comedy, it's like the problems I'm trying to solve, they're not always so different. And you also, I've learned, given the amount I've run around and done different genre, how much you can learn, how much help it is to make a horror film, and then go make Walk the Line. How you are fresh and you're looking at ways to solve problems and you're looking at solutions, different kinds of solutions. If that's any indication, I mean, I love all kinds of movies. So, but I think this movie very much is a kind of, noir-y Western. I mean, I don't think in many ways we're almost always at night. We're in very close quarters. We're on the road and on the run. And I think that there's an eclecticism to it, I guess. I don't know. I don't feel it. I mean, I guess it's just me waking up every day and making a movie, so I don't.
Now, we're going to take a couple of questions from you guys. So, first question, there's a gentleman there. No, you, sir, who turned around. So please stand down and say who your question is for.
It's actually me.
Oh, all right.
For me. I just want to say first, Hugh, I've been a lifetime Wolverine fan, and you will always be Wolverine to me. And Jim.
That's worth applauding.
Yeah. Jim, I just wanted to ask you if there's any breath of any whispers of any thought of an X-23 movie.
Oh, there's more than a breath or a whisper. I was working on one.
Yeah. There's a lady over there in the corner, ma'am. Your hand's still up. Yes, that is you.
Hi guys.
Please stand up.
I totally enjoyed the movie, but this is totally irrelevant. My friend was diagnosed with cancer today, and I just want to get well soon from Hugh Jackman before I leave, if that's possible.
What's your friend's name?
Tracy Green.
Tracy Green. Get well, battle hard, stay close to your friends, and believe. That's all.
Sir, here in the white t-shirt.
I was the Logan cosplayer.
Whoa, dude!
That wasn't too
I had the honor of
long.
interviewing you and Jim. Coolest day of my life by far. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And Hutch, I just wanted, before I ask him the question, since Hugh unfortunately will not grace us with his amazing presence, if you do need to recast the part, I know someone who'd be an excellent choice.
Balls of steel. Like, really? That deserves applause for that. Your question is.
I go by Monster Mash, by the way, on YouTube. I'd love it if you watch my interviews. Patrick told me that his favorite scene in the movie is when Logan and he first interact. What was your favorite scene, and what was your favorite scene, Jim? First for Hugh.
What is favorite scene?
I really love the scene where Daphne first speaks. I think she's astonishing in that. I went to apologise to her mum because I think I told her 11-year-old daughter to fuck off at least 20 times, and only 9 were scripted.
Shut up! Shut the fuck up!
And she said to me, she says, "Don't worry." In Spanish, she said some pretty bad things to you too. That's one of my favourites, and the one with Patrick. It's one of my favourite Patrick stories. So I'm going to tell you. There's a scene with the three of us in the car, and it's a lovely scene. I mean, one thing you didn't say about the movie, it's kind of a road movie.
Yes.
It's a very big, expensive, wonderful road movie, and we were doing one of those scenes in Natchez, Mississippi, very hot, and on our way back, Patrick seemed a little melancholic, and Daphne said, "You all right?" And he said, "I need you to promise me something, Daphne." She said, "What?" She said, "Promise me that you'll do the theatre." And she goes, Logan? Why? He says, because you asked me why I look sad. I'm sad because there's not many days in film that you will get to act a beautiful scene like this, and now it's done and we will never get to act it again. But in the theatre for 6 months, every single night, you'll get to do it again.
Sure. I love the scene as well where Daphne first speaks. It was kind of a moment when we shot that day where I kind of knew we had the movie. Like there's these moments where I'm quiet about it. I don't go running around everyone, but it's kind of like, wow, that really happened. We've also talked a lot about the opening tank scene, which I'm very proud of. But there's one other scene that I always, when I'm watching the film, I never want to leave or look away in this scene, which is again a Daphne scene with Hugh, which is late in the film when she confronts him with the bullet and finds this bullet, and he admits to her in a beautiful performance by both of them that he contemplated killing himself with this bullet. And what always moves me about it is the kind of the gamble of the scene and the way the two actors make it pay off, which is that it is an incredibly adult scene going on between a kind of man-child, in a way, a man, 200-year-old man who is
Man-wolf child,
who is at the edge, who is in such a state of undoneness that he needs someone, and this 11-year-old who is this rock for him in this scene, who hears him and listens to him and processes the very dark things he's saying and kind of just takes it in and is there for him. And there is a kind of, to me, that scene is the scene where they are father and daughter, speaking honestly to one another about what they've been and who they are. And I love, there's a piece, after I wrote it, I threw it to Scott Frank, and there's a thing he wrote when Daphne says, I've hurt people too, and he says, you're gonna have to learn to live with that, and then that I wrote, and then Daphne goes, they were bad people, and I had the scene end there, and then Scott added, what was it?
All the same.
They're all the same, meaning don't get so cocky that you killed some bad people. Killing is fucked, and that there's something about that scene and who Wolverine is and the burden of violence, because in a funny way also that scene to me becomes about, yes, it's rated R, and yes, you see claws poking through people's heads, but actually in many ways much less than PG movies where 150 people are thrown off buildings or mowed down with machine guns. Without seeing all that much, I feel that the movie is very much anti-violence, or the weight, or the kind of the legacy of violence that these characters carry, and the kind of pain of violence, and the psychic toll it takes. And it was my hope and one of my great rewards that the movie seems to communicate that to people and not just be kind of getting off on violence. And
Thank you very much, sir.
That's one very good. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that. It's not, I suppose it's the same, but my favourite moment, not only in this movie, but I think maybe in any movie I've ever been in, is one that Jim wrote. And I thought it was beautiful when I saw it on the page, but when I saw it in the film, I literally cried my eyes out. And that is, I don't want to give it away to people who haven't seen it, but
we've all seen it, buddy.
Bet on the...
Oh, down there.
Yeah.
Turn off.
Anyway, but where a crucifix was turned into an X, that particular moment is, to me, that's when I felt I'm at peace with having said goodbye to this.
Literally and figuratively. And we're at peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.